Hollywood's golden age gave us towering legends. At least that's what the camera wanted you to believe. Behind the smoke lights and perfectly framed shots, some of cinema's biggest giants were barely tall enough to change a ceiling light without a ladder. Apple boxes dug trenches and custom elevator shoes were all part of the trickery. These guys didn't just act. They performed the greatest illusion of all, looking tall enough to stare danger in the eye without standing on tiptoe. Number 1. Mickey Rooney, Hollywood's biggest little star. At just 5'2", Mickey Rooney was shorter than most of his leading ladies, his co-stars, and probably half the ushers in the theater. But for a time in the late 30s and early 40s, he was the biggest box office draw in America. How by turning what could have been a career killer into his secret weapon. When MGM needed a wholesome all-American teenager, Rooney didn't just fit the bill, he owned it. Playing Andy Hardy well into his 20s, he made audiences believe he was still the kid next door, always chasing love and trouble in equal measure. His height wasn't a liability, it was an alibi for staying forever young. Of course, even the boy wonder had to grow up. When Rooney moved into more adult roles, MGM brought out the full Hollywood toolbox, custom-made shoes with 3-inch lifts, camera angles so low they could film ants, and carefully choreographed blocking that kept him literally a step above his co-stars. Cinematographer Harold Rawson even developed lighting tricks to stretch Rooney's shadow on the wall, making him look taller without anyone realizing why. Costume designers knew the rules: no horizontal lines, no baggy fits, just clean verticals to give him extra visual inches. And when none of that worked, well, sometimes the best move was to lean into the joke. Rooney had the kind of confidence to let himself be the punchline, especially in later years, when pairing him with a towering actress became part of the comedy. Rooney once said, "I'm not a tall man, but I stand among giants in this business." And it was true, giants like Spencer Tracy, Judy Garland, and Elizabeth Taylor. The thing is, Mickey never tried to be taller. He just tried to be better. As director Clarence Brown put it, Mickey had more talent in his 5'2" frame than most actors twice his size. The camera doesn't measure inches. It measures presence. And Rooney's presence. That was skyscraper tall. Number 2. Humphrey Bogart, the not-so-tall, dark stranger. Humphrey Bogart was the ultimate tough guy, cool, sardonic, with a cigarette dangling from his lips and a glare that could stop a freight train. In Casablanca, he looked like a man who could take on the Nazis before breakfast and still have time for a brooding love scene. But here's the twist: Bogart's height wasn't exactly the tall, dark, and handsome. Depending on who you believe, he was somewhere between 5'6" and 5'8", but never the 5'10" that Warner Brothers swore up and down in their press releases. When Bogart was playing second-string heavies in the 30s, nobody cared. But the moment he became a leading man in High Sierra and the Maltese Falcon, the studio scrambled to make him look every inch the towering romantic hero. Enter the bogey box, a portable platform he'd stand on whenever a co-star threatened to overshadow him. In Casablanca, it became essential Ingrid Bergman was 5'9", and heels made her practically Amazonian. Director Michael Curtiz got creative, putting Bogart on steps, placing Bergman in chairs, and framing shots so you'd never guess who'd really win in a height contest. Cinematographer Arthur Edison played his part with low angles, shadow tricks, and suits tailored by Ori Kelly to elongate Bogart's frame. Vertical stripes, high-waisted trousers. If fashion could add inches, Bogart was wearing it. Here's the genius part. Bogart's iconic stillness wasn't just style, it was strategy. He knew that staying rooted in place, letting his face and voice do the heavy lifting, kept the illusion intact. Move too much, and the audience might start measuring. Stand still, speak low, and they just lean in closer. Warner's publicity machine guarded the truth like state secrets. Official photos were staged, public appearances choreographed. But honestly, it didn't matter. As director John Huston put it, when Bogart walked into a room, you felt it before you saw him. That kind of presence can't be measured in inches. So yeah, maybe Bogey wasn't as tall as you thought. But on screen, he was 10 feet of pure legend. Number 3. Alan Ladd, the original box office star who needed a box. In the 1940s, Alan Ladd could glare into the camera, mutter a line in that cool, tight-lipped way, and instantly convince you he could take down an army with one bullet. On screen, he was all menace and mystery, the kind of guy you wouldn't dare cross in a dark alley. Off screen, let's just say you might mistake him for your kid's favorite substitute teacher, at least in the height department. Ladd stood a modest 5'6", and some insiders whispered it was even less. In a Hollywood that demanded its leading men loom like oak trees, that was a problem. Paramount Pictures didn't just fix it, they turned it into an art form. Their secret weapon, Veronica Lake. At 4'11", she made Ladd look like a redwood without a single camera trick. The studio paired them in 7 films, not just for their sizzling chemistry, but because together they were the ultimate optical illusion. When taller co-stars showed up, things got creative. On Shane, director George Stevens literally dug trenches for Jack Palance and Van Heflin to stand in so Ladd could keep his hard-won altitude advantage. Crew members even had a name for them, Ladd Trenches. And when digging wasn't an option, out came the Ladd boxes. Apple crates and hidden platforms designed to give him those precious extra inches. Cinematographers worked their magic with low angles and lighting that stretched him skyward. Costume designers gave him vertical pinstripes, high-waisted pants, and custom-built shoes with 2 to 3 inches of lift. You think superheroes have special suits, Ladd had his own height-enhancing armor. Here's the kicker: that restrained, almost statuesque acting style he's famous for. Part of it was necessity. Any big movement could ruin the illusion, so Ladd stayed still, let his piercing blue eyes do the heavy lifting, and made the camera fall in love with his face instead of measuring his legs. As one director put it, what Alan lacked in inches, he made up for in intensity. The camera didn't see his height, it saw his eyes. And those eyes, ladies and gentlemen, were 6 feet tall. Number 4, James Cagney, the compact powerhouse who could outpunch a giant. James Cagney didn't need to be tall. He didn't even need to be average. At a modest 5'5", he was still the guy who could slap you, dance on your dignity, and steal your girl all before lunch. Hollywood liked its leading men tall, broad-shouldered, and able to glare down the camera. Cagney just glared up and somehow made you feel like you were the one looking small. On screen, from The Public Enemy to White Heat, Cagney exploded with the energy of a stick of dynamite in human form. And just like dynamite, he came in a small package. Warner Brothers knew his height might raise eyebrows, so they played it smart. They surrounded him with co-stars of similar or shorter stature. Casting directors practically kept a measuring tape on set to make sure nobody towered over their star. But when a tall actor was unavoidable, directors busted out the Cagney tricks, low-angle shots dubbed the Cagney angle staircase confrontations, or seating him while others stood, because somehow that made him seem more in control, not less. Publicity departments swore up and down he was 5'9", a full 4 inches taller than reality. Nobody questioned it because Cagney moved like a coiled spring ready to blow. His signature bounce, rapid-fire delivery, and sudden bursts of violence made him seem 10 feet tall in spirit. As one film historian put it, Cagney's energy made him larger than life. You didn't measure him with a ruler, you measured him with a stopwatch. Cagney himself couldn't care less. "I don't care how tall I am or how short I am. I care about whether I can act," he once said. That attitude made him bulletproof to Hollywood's obsession with inches. In fact, he turned it into an advantage. No one was paying attention to his height when he was threatening to top of the world maw you into oblivion. The truth, James Cagney didn't just break the rules of height in Hollywood. He danced on them, threw them in the trunk, and drove off laughing. And the camera loved him for it. Number 5. Edward G. Robinson, the Little Caesar who ruled from 5'5". Edward G. Robinson didn't just play gangsters, he owned the gangster image. In Little Caesar, he could glare at you from behind a desk and make you feel like you owed him money, your car, and maybe your soul. But here's the twist. Hollywood's towering crime boss stood at just 5'5". That's right, the man who could order a hit with one squint had to stand on a box to see over the counter at some diners. Studios didn't just hide Robinson's height, they redefined intimidation. Directors like Mervyn Leroy and Fritz Lang didn't bother making him look taller. Instead, they made him feel taller. They'd frame him in scenes where he was always in control, sitting behind a desk, while everyone else stood like nervous school kids or leaning in just close enough to invade a taller man's personal space until the poor guy shrank without even realizing it. And then there was that voice, sharp, nasal, and packed with so much authority it practically added 6 inches. Director John Huston put it best, Eddie didn't need to be tall. He had a voice that made him 10 feet high. Publicists weren't so poetic, they just lied. Official bios claimed he was 5'9", and reporters were only invited to seated interviews. In group photos, the camera always just happened to catch him at the perfect angle, which is to say, the "I'm totally taller than you" angle. Robinson leaned into his physical reality, using it to make his gangsters more layered. A shorter mob boss that meant he had to fight harder, be meaner, and think faster to survive among bigger men. Film critic Roger Ebert later said his size made his characters more dangerous because you knew they had something to prove. So sure, Edward G. Robinson wasn't the tallest man in the room, but he didn't need to be. He ruled it anyway. And if you forgot that, well, as Rico might tell you, you're gonna remember number 6. Sal Mineo, the compact rebel who broke hearts. In Rebel Without a Cause, Sal Mineo was the kid you wanted to protect, wide-eyed, vulnerable, and tragically doomed. But behind that heartbreaking performance was another truth at 5'6". Mineo was one of Hollywood's fun-sized leading men. Not that anyone cared at first. His smaller stature actually helped him land teenage roles well into his 20s, because nothing says high school like a baby face and the ability to look up to James Dean without faking it. Director Nicholas Ray even used the height gap between Mineo and Dean to his advantage. Standing next to Dean made Mineo's character seem even more fragile, the little brother figure in a world full of wolves. Audiences bought it completely. But as Mineo aged out of teenage angst, Hollywood's tape measure came calling. Leading men were supposed to be tall enough to sweep a woman off her feet, literally. So the studio rolled out the standard issue 2-inch lifts, low camera angles, and blocking tricks that kept him on higher ground. His costumes were tailored razor-sharp with vertical details to stretch the eye. And then there was the hair, the Mineo pompadour, a glorious, gravity-defying style that added a couple of visual inches and a lot of attitude. Mineo wasn't obsessed with hiding his height, though. In certain roles, he leaned into it, letting the audience see a character's vulnerability. The problem was Hollywood didn't always know what to do with a shorter, sensitive leading man once he wasn't playing kids. The roles shrank even if his talent didn't. Director Don Siegel once said Sal had more talent in his small frame than most actors, twice his size. It's just a shame Hollywood couldn't see past the inches. And that's the real tragedy. Mineo could act rings around taller co-stars, but in an industry addicted to height, even rebels had their limits. Number 7. Sammy Davis Jr., the little man with the giant stage. Sammy Davis Jr. was 5'3", shorter than most of his Rat Pack buddies, shorter than many of his leading ladies, and definitely shorter than his talent deserved. But when Sammy hit the stage height, became irrelevant. The man didn't just perform, he detonated. Singer, dancer, actor, comedian Sammy did it all often in the same performance. His energy was so electric that audiences didn't have time to think about inches. On stage with Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin, he was often the smallest figure in the spotlight, yet somehow the one your eyes couldn't leave. That didn't mean Hollywood ignored the optics. Sammy had his custom elevator shoes adding 2 or 3 inches and a towering pompadour that could have its own zip code. Directors used low camera angles, careful blocking, and raised platforms to even the playing field. In group scenes, Sammy was often in motion, while taller co-stars stood still, giving him a kinetic dominance that size alone couldn't buy. The Rat Pack knew how to turn it into part of the act. During one Vegas show, Dean Martin teased him about his height. Sammy shot back without missing a beat. "I may be looking up at you physically, but musically, you're looking up at me." The crowd roared because it was true. Sammy was untouchable where it counted. Off stage, the man faced obstacles far bigger than height. As a black entertainer in a segregated America, Sammy dealt with prejudice that would have flattened a lesser spirit. Instead, he turned it into fuel. Being a short, one-eyed black man in show business meant I had to be 10 times better than everyone else, he said. So that's what I became, 10 times better. Frank Sinatra put it even more simply. Sammy may be short in inches, but he's a giant in talent. And when Sammy Davis Jr. stepped into the spotlight, nobody in the room or in the audience saw 5'3". They saw a skyscraper. Number 8. Burgess Meredith, the mighty might of Hollywood. Burgess Meredith was 5'5", which meant in Hollywood terms, he was often looking up at his co-stars literally. But that never stopped him from stealing scenes, whether he was barking orders as Mickey and Rocky or waddling with villainous glee as the Penguin in TV's Batman. The beauty of being a character actor. You didn't always have to play the towering hero. Sometimes being smaller made you more believable, especially if you were training a guy like Rocky Balboa. Mickey wasn't supposed to be a giant. He was supposed to be the scrappy, gravel-voiced underdog who knew how to turn a fighter into a champion. And Burgess nailed it. When a role did require more authority, though, the old tricks came out. Elevator shoes, subtle platforms, and low camera angles that made him look like he could stare down a general. His posture was perfect, ramrod straight, and his movements were economical, each gesture packed with purpose. On screen, he never looked small. He looked precise, like every inch of him was working toward the next moment. Then there was that voice, deep, resonant, and commanding. Director John Huston once said, "Burgess doesn't need height. He has a voice that fills any room." That voice could turn a quiet line into a command and a rant into a battle cry. Unlike some actors, Burgess didn't seem to waste a second worrying about inches. If a role needed him to be tiny and tough, he leaned in. If it needed him to loom, he had the tools to fake it. For him, it was all about craft. "If I can make you believe I'm a military commander or a boxing champ," he once said, "then my actual dimensions are irrelevant." Number 9. Dustin Hoffman, the graduate who majored in height illusions. Dustin Hoffman never looked like your textbook Hollywood leading man, and he knew it. At 5'6", he was a far cry from the square-jawed 6-foot archetypes plastered on movie posters in the 60s. But Hoffman didn't try to hide it. He weaponized it. His breakout in The Graduate wasn't just a coming-of-age tale, it was a masterclass in how to turn short guy into cinematic giant. Director Mike Nichols played it both ways. Sure, he used platforms and low camera angles when needed, but he also let Hoffman's size become part of the story. Facing off against the statuesque Anne Bancroft Hoffman's Benjamin Braddock wasn't just awkward, he looked it too. And it worked. Unlike Golden Age stars who fought tooth and nail to look taller, Hoffman embraced the underdog vibe. In Midnight Cowboy and Kramer vs. Kramer, his stature underscored the uphill battles his characters faced. Being physically smaller made every victory feel bigger. Not that the old tricks disappeared entirely. Hoffman had his share of platform shoes, adding 2 or 3 inches on set, and costumes designed to stretch his frame. Wardrobe avoided horizontal patterns like they were career poison, sticking to clean vertical lines. Cinematographers swapped the obvious low angles of the 40s for more subtle setups that made Hoffman appear balanced with taller co-stars. And sometimes being short was an outright asset. In Tootsie, his smaller build made his transformation into Dorothy Michaels far more believable. No one in the audience thought, "That's a linebacker in a dress." Instead, they bought into the illusion completely. Publicists in the Golden Age might have padded his bio with a few extra inches, but by the 70s, Hoffman just sidestepped the question. He once told an interviewer, "I think I was lucky being short. It forced me to develop other qualities. I was never going to be the conventional leading man, so I had to find my own path." Number 10, Danny Kaye, the height of comedy. Danny Kaye didn't need to be the tallest guy in the room. He just needed to be the loudest, the fastest, and the funniest. At 5'7", he was shorter than a lot of his leading ladies, but when Kaye was on screen, nobody was reaching for a measuring tape. They were too busy trying to keep up. Kaye was a whirlwind, singing, dancing, cracking jokes at machine gun speed. In The Secret Life of Walter Mitty and the Court Jester, he was a one-man variety show. His constant motion made him hard to size up, literally. Audiences didn't have time to think, "Hey, isn't he a bit short?" They were too busy laughing. That didn't mean Hollywood left it to chance. Samuel Goldwyn Studios had a few tricks up their sleeve: raised platforms for romantic scenes, camera angles that shaved off any height, disadvantage, and costumes tailored with vertical lines to elongate his frame. Edith Head, the legendary costume designer, made sure Kaye's suits always fit like a dream, slim sharp, and built to make him look like he had an extra couple of inches. Kaye himself never seemed bothered. In fact, he leaned into it with a wink and a grin. While filming White Christmas with the towering 6'3" Bing Crosby, Kaye quipped to the crew, "Between the two of us, we average out to a perfect height. Bing's got the surplus, I've got the shortage." That kind of good-natured self-awareness was part of his charm and why audiences adored him. Here's the thing: Kaye's compact frame was actually perfect for his style. It made him quicker on his feet, sharper in his movements, and able to pull off complex dance routines without looking like he was wrestling with his own limbs. Director Norman Z. MacLeod summed it up best: Danny's energy makes you forget about physical dimensions. When he's performing, he expands beyond his actual size. He becomes as big as his talent, which is enormous. So sure, Danny Kaye wasn't a towering figure, but in the world of comedy, he stood head and shoulders above the rest. Number 11, George Raft, the diminutive gangster with the big-time swagger. George Raft didn't just play gangsters, he was the guy you crossed the street to avoid. Slick hair, cold stare, and a walk so smooth it looked like he was gliding. On screen, in Scarface and Each Dawn I Die, he oozed danger. But in person, let's just say that at 5'7", he might not have been the tallest guy in the lineup, unless the lineup was in junior high. Raft's secret weapon wasn't height, it was stillness. While other actors puffed out their chests and waved their arms around, Raft stood rock solid, barely moving, letting the tension build until you swore he was about to snap. And if you're standing that still, it's a lot easier to hide the fact you're on a platform. Warner Brothers wasn't about to let one of their prime tough guys look small, so they rolled out the usual gangster toolkit low-angle shots, subtle lifts in his custom shoes, a cool 2 inches, and perfectly tailored suits with vertical pinstripes and high waistlines to stretch his silhouette. Casting was strategic too. Supporting actors were often chosen partly because they wouldn't make Raft look like a little brother tagging along. Of course, when a tall co-star was unavoidable, blocking became an art form. Directors kept Raft on slightly higher ground or placed him closer to the camera so the perspective did the heavy lifting. And in publicity photos, he was always front and center, the human equivalent of forced perspective in a tourist snapshot. Ironically, his smaller build made him more intimidating. As film historian Eddie Muller put it, Raft didn't need to loom over you to be threatening. His stillness and those dead eyes made him scarier than bigger men who relied on size. Raft himself never seemed insecure about it. As director Raoul Walsh recalled, George knew exactly what he was and wasn't. He didn't waste energy on what he couldn't change, he just used what he had to maximum effect. Number 12, Frank Sinatra, the voice that stood taller than any man. Frank Sinatra didn't need 6 feet of height, he had the voice. That smooth, swaggering baritone could fill a room, melt a heart, or start a bar fight. And by the time fans saw him in the flesh, they'd already imagined him as a towering figure. Surprise old Blue Eyes stood about 5'7", maybe a little less on a bad hair day. When Sinatra broke into acting, the studios weren't about to let reality mess with the legend. Custom elevator shoes, absolutely adding 2 or 3 inches. Low camera angles. You bet. Careful blocking, so he was always on the high step, or his co-star was on the low one. That was standard operating procedure. It came in handy, especially when he was paired with tall leading ladies like Doris Day or Deborah Kerr. If Sinatra was supposed to sweep a woman off her feet, they made sure he didn't need a step stool to do it. The trick was so smooth, audiences never caught on, partly because they were too busy listening to that voice and watching the way he carried himself. And Sinatra carried himself. As director Gordon Douglas put it, Frank walked into a room like he owned it. And because he believed it, everyone else did too. He didn't hide from comparisons either. When he married Mia Farrow, who stood 5'9" without heels, the two were photographed together constantly. Instead of looking diminished, Frank somehow looked more in control. Confidence was his true lift kit. Publicity photos were always flattering, sure, but Sinatra didn't live in fear of being found out. By the 60s, his stature was public knowledge, but it didn't matter. He was already a legend. As director Sidney J. Furie said after working with him, Frank had something far more important than height. He had presence. And the camera knows the difference. And now let's raise our eyes and maybe our necks to meet the true giants of Hollywood. Number 13, Clint Walker, the gentle giant of the Wild West. At 6'6", Clint Walker didn't just walk into a scene, he entered like a monument. Star of the hit TV series Cheyenne, he made saloon doors look like dollhouse props. When Clint mounted a horse, the poor animal looked like it was giving a ride to a tree. Directors never had to use camera tricks to make him imposing. Half the time they had to shoot from across the street just to fit his whole frame in. Despite his intimidating stature, Walker was famously mild-mannered, earning the nickname the Gentle Giant. Co-stars joked that standing next to him made them feel like children at a parent-teacher conference. Wardrobe departments had to special order boots and hats big enough to fit him, and when he wore a cowboy hat, it practically had its own skyline. Yet Walker's real power wasn't just in his size, it was in his calm authority. When Clint said something on screen, you believed it not because he yelled, but because he didn't have to. His height already spoke volumes. Number 14. Richard Kiel, the man who could bite a steel cable. Richard Kiel was a walking skyscraper at 7'2". Best known as Jaws in the James Bond films, he was living proof that sometimes the bad guy really is larger than life. Those metal teeth weren't just for show, they were the perfect punctuation mark for a man whose mere silhouette could send heroes running. Kiel's height was so extreme that he made stuntmen nervous before the fight scenes even began. On set, his co-stars often had to stand on boxes or be filmed from an entirely different platform just to share a frame with him. He was a director's dream when they needed menace, no CGI, no tricks, just point the camera up. Off-screen, Kiel was known as a